All right, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Korn, clinical professor and director of the Health Justice Clinic at Duke Law School. And I'm really happy to welcome you to our Teaching Justice webinar series and our very first session of 2023. Today, our topic is Teaching Justice under the ABA's Standard 303 mandate. This is taught by Carolyn Grose from Mitchell Hamline, Gautam from Cornell, Renee at UIC Law, and Elizabeth Cooper from Fordham.
Hi, I'm Layla Halas. I'm the co-director of the Immigrant Rights Clinic at Tulane Law School. I'm also on the Best Practices Committee for CLIA, which this series is a part of. And we have, for many years, Teaching Justice has featured a number of innovative faculty thinking about the intersections of justice and social movements. We have looked at criminal justice, immigration policy, racial justice, economic justice, among other topics. I wanted to let you know on March 8th, we're going to have Erica Wilson from UNC presenting on teaching justice through critical race lawyering. And April 13th, we'll have Linus Panton leading an hour-long session. We invite you to stay tuned on the CLIA web site where we're going to post all the registration information as well as all of the recordings. So this recording will be available on that as well. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, as Layla mentioned, and as you likely got a notice about, this session is going to be recorded, so we'll make sure and circulate that information and encourage you to go back and revisit our past 4+ years of presentations. We also encourage interaction here using the chat function. You can raise any issues or questions that come up during the presentation. Layla and I will be monitoring that and making sure that our presenters are aware. This also is scheduled to be a little bit of a longer session, so we'll make sure that there's ample time for Q&A. We ask everyone to please mute their microphones during the pendency of the presentation, except for when there's Q&A, of course. But if you're comfortable, we welcome you to keep your video on during the session. I'm going to hand it over to our colleagues in just one moment. I am going to share my screen that does have a slide just outlining 303 so that we can all be grounded in the same information as our presenters begin. Here we go. Great, take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much, and Layla and Allison, this is really great to be here, and we're really excited about this conversation. So what we're going to do here is reenact what I imagine is happening all over the country at your law schools. We are going to reenact a faculty meeting where the topic of how to respond to these mandates is under discussion. And we are each, I am the, what at my school we call the vice dean. I'm playing the role of the vice dean, and I will be moderating and facilitating the faculty meeting. And we have 3 members of the faculty, Liz Cooper and Gautam and Renee Hatcher. Each of them are going to play a particular role. They are not playing themselves. Some of them feel very strongly that I make that clear. They are not playing themselves. And we are going to have this faculty meeting to discuss various issues that have arisen at our schools and that we've heard about arising at other schools, to kind of surface some of the issues raised by both the mandates and the attempts to respond to the mandates. So before we get into the simulation, I just want to make sure we all understand what we're talking about. So the ABA has promulgated these amendments to Standard 303B and C, requiring law schools to provide substantial opportunities for the development of professional identity. That's basically what 303B says, and 303C, providing opportunities for law students to be educated on bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism, both at the start of their program and at least once again. And I've highlighted the slide in such a way to indicate the 2 essential pieces of the mandates. The red describes when these opportunities need to take place. So there have to be substantial opportunities for the development of professional identity, and there have to be 2 opportunities for the education on bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism. Those are the red, the bolded red, and then the bolded blue is the content. So what kind of content will achieve the goal of providing the opportunities for development of professional identity, and what kind of content would achieve the goal of providing education on bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism. So this is the backdrop, and I think we can stop sharing the screen now so we can see each other. But so this faculty meeting has convened to discuss how our law school is going to respond to this requirement. Before we get into it, though, for those of you who are not as familiar with kind of where we are in this process with the ABA, the suggestion by the ABA was that law schools had to come up with a plan to respond to these mandates sometime this past fall. But there's no requirement that we report anything. The way the ABA will determine if law schools are in compliance is just through the normal course of business through the accreditation process. So if your school is scheduled for a site visit this spring, chances are you're going to have to show that you complied with the requirement of having a plan by this past fall. For those of us who are not, at the end of our 7-year accreditation cycle, we have some time. However, and the ABA has said they're not going to provide any further guidance or guidelines on what a plan would look like until they've heard from law schools. And then they will promulgate guidance based on what they have already heard. And sort of consistent with what they see law schools are doing, they will provide further guidance. So there is a question about whether, if your law school is doing stuff that you think is pretty great, or that the law school is happy about and proud of, is there a reason to report to the ABA about those activities in an effort to kind of steer the guidance that the ABA will end up giving? And that might be something that comes up in the course of our faculty meeting. The other issue that comes up, particularly in the context of clinics, is where this instruction, where these opportunities should land. Is this something that really should be housed in the clinic and experiential wing of a law school, or is it something that should be taken on by the law school as a whole? And that is a conversation that I imagine is going on at all of your law schools, and clinicians, I imagine, feel a couple different ways about it. So that's one of the issues that will come up. And then there are other related issues of status, internal status. Who is providing this training and education, and what is their position in the law school community relative to other instructors and certainly tenured faculty or tenure track faculty, and how do those internal status issues play to the bigger conversation about how we educate our law students to be professionally responsible, culturally humble, anti-bias social justice warriors, if we ourselves aren't treated with that kind of given the kind of power and autonomy that we think we deserve. And then also the underlying question of clinicians themselves. Are we, or indeed is the law school faculty as a whole, trained to provide this kind of instruction? Who are we to say what is or is not anti-racist? Are we in a position to be able to teach that kind of material without greater training on our own? So these are just some of the issues that we imagine will come up in the faculty meeting. But we also want to invite all of you. So there are about 44 of you. That's a big faculty, but it's not an unheard of size for a faculty meeting. So consider yourselves members of this faculty. And as many of our faculty meetings are, it is on Zoom, but you can participate via the chat. And we might have other vice deans who are going to be monitoring the chat. And if you have a question or a comment, in response to what we all are talking about, just put it in the chat and you will be called on to participate. So that way we hope that this will actually be a robust discussion of the faculty. And you can play a role if you want, or you can be yourself. And we just hope that this can be a conversation both that highlights issues and roles that we have identified, but also that engages all of us in this important discussion about what we should be doing in light of these new mandates. So without further ado, I think I am going to call this meeting to order, and just wonder, my colleagues, if any of you wants to kind of open the discussion about how you think we should be responding to these mandates.
Well, I just have to say, I think this is a very strange move by the ABA. I don't really know, why they think that this is going to make a difference, given their focus really should be on legal education. I mean, we are really a law school that's preparing our students to be leaders and lawyers. And, I try to do that in, all my very dynamic classes, like, the way that I teach contracts is really focused on lawyering, and this just doesn't seem to be central to our mission. So, I'm heartened to hear that, the ABA isn't really going to be assessing us on this, because I frankly don't have the time in my classes to be dealing with this. I have to do my research and focus on that. And this is just something that I don't feel is really my problem or my priority.
Renee?
I think I have a similar concern as my colleague mentioned, in terms of us focusing on what happens in the classroom. And so while I think that this rule was a good step in the right direction, I think it falls short in the sense that it can't just be 2 opportunities over the course of law school. I think that we need to think seriously about the needed reform to legal education. And really, if we're serious about providing meaningful opportunities around professional identity or bias or racism in the law, that means that we're going to have to embed that kind of analysis and exploration throughout legal education. And so it can't just be once at the beginning and then perhaps my clinic or one of my colleagues' clinic who teaches here. I think that we have to think more broadly about transforming how we actually provide legal education.
Liz?
So, I for once in my life, I actually think that the ABA did the right thing. I think that they hit the ball out of the park on this, because they take a very realistic approach that says we're not going to totally revamp law schools. I mean, Renee, there are a lot of things that I'd like to change in our law school, but we're not like burning it down and starting all over again. And Gautam, I'm sure your classes are incredibly dynamic, but even in the context of say contracts, there is some history, history about racism and buying and selling people and contracts that were valid for doing that. I think it behooves us to talk about those kinds of things, but we're not going to recreate all of legal education, but we do have some commitment to our students to acknowledge the times that we're living in.
Gautam, how do you, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I certainly people are talking about race. I hear a lot about race all the time. Maybe, this, I feel that, our classes our schools should have the space for people who don't necessarily want to always be dealing with that. And certainly, I get that this isn't really a lot, but I don't think that I have to deal with it. Why do I have to? I mean, we have a clinical program where I assume, I don't really know, what goes on in the basement, or, that's not really my business. But, I think that seems to be the appropriate way to do it. Obviously, people like Renee have much more experience and expertise than than people like me on this issue, and I would be more than comfortable to cede it to the clinical program. That seems to be, what we tell people is where they can engage, and then they can learn law in my class.
Well, I appreciate you acknowledging my base of knowledge, Gautam. My concern, though, however, is that we often fall short in our DEI initiatives, in the sense that we think that they're add-ons to what we do in our day-to-day kind of jobs, classroom, whatever that looks like at the law school. I think for those initiatives to be meaningful, similar to this new ABA rule, is that we have to think about it embedded across everything we do at the law school. How do we embed these principles in how we teach the law, in how we provide other kinds of support services to our students, and how we actually think about our responsibility as faculty members? And so similarly, I think my concern is that for the clinic to kind of be the space to then bring up these issues after either 2 or 3 years that students have already spent in doctrinal classes, they don't necessarily understand how it is a through line for how the law functions and also the historical development of the law. So I don't think that we should be thinking about simply delegating this work to clinicians. I think that we all have a role to play, and that we have to think about how to more systemically embed these new regs from the ABA across everything we do here.
Holly, did you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I'm struck by the fact that this is very similar to professional responsibility and ethics. It's something that we should be covering in everything we do, and we choose not to because it's not interesting, it's boring, it's what have you. And I think the students understand that it must not be that important if we aren't talking about it that often. So in the same space, if we think this is important, then this should be throughout our curriculum. It should be everyone. And the students get the importance of it to us as an institution by how we present it to them. And if it's kind of like, oh gosh, now I've got to talk about ethics, now I've got to talk about race and inequality, oh gosh, it sends the wrong message.
Liz?
So I think that I am largely in agreement with Renee and Holly in that, I hear Gautam expressing some discomfort about talking about race in his classroom. And in reality, Gautam, you're a terrific scholar. You publish all the time. I would imagine that you would be able to go and spend some time, learning a little bit about the role of racism in the development of contracts. I even understand that there are bibliographies that are out there right now that particularly with regard to the 1L classes, the ALS has a bibliography. I don't see why this should be so difficult for those of us who think of ourselves as teachers and scholars to integrate into the courses that we're offering. And of course, we should be offering seminars and things like that around critical race theory as well, I think.
Gautam.
Well, I certainly understand this point of analogizing it to the professional responsibility requirement. Certainly that requirement itself has been criticized, maybe for some of the reasons that you all have mentioned. But I also think, that, at least professional responsibility is an area of law that, people, do, important research on. And this is just so broad, I don't really know what this would even fall under, critical race theory maybe, but I don't know if I think that our school should be diving into that, given the political considerations. And I think that's the other thing too, is that, I would never, I love this school. I've been teaching at the school since 1855. And so I really feel that I have a deep commitment to it. But, I think if we were going to start mandating certain, coverages of material, then we're going to run into some academic freedom issues. I would never, raise that kind of claim speciously. I'm just concerned about the institution, which I, so deeply care about when I laid the first cornerstone back in 1619 about, when we started this law school. I really think that we don't want to get in any trouble. And, if the clinical program is the right place for it, I think that seems to make sense to me. And then we would satisfy the standard and we can get on to dealing with the real problems of the school, which is really that we need to hire a lot more people like me.
Renee.
I think that we have to discuss the larger context in which this rule was made. I think that we also have to be mindful of the demands that our students have been voicing, not just at our law school, but across the country, about real changes to legal education and the way that it's taught in the classroom. I seriously think it would be a mistake to simply delegate this to what often happens, either the clinical program to discuss issues of racial justice or racism in the law. But then also, I think we have to be really thoughtful about all engaging this process. At least to a certain extent, since 2020, that's the first time we've really been having these conversations about race and trying to figure out what changes we need to make here. While I think we have done some things, we haven't necessarily gone far enough. And the idea that the bulk of that work would fall on those faculty members that are doing clinical work, or specifically sometimes that they fall only on faculty of color that might be teaching courses like critical race theory or others, I think is a mistake. And I think that's not what our students have asked us for, but more than that, that is not necessarily the context in which we find ourselves and where this rule is coming from.
But I just really think that students, they all ask for all sorts of things, right? They all want to get A+ and go clerk on the Supreme Court, but that's not going to happen, right? So I think certainly students have demands, but I've been hearing student demands since the 1300s when I started teaching, and I never bothered to respond to any one of them, and it's been working out for me just fine.
Liz.
Renee, when you just said a few minutes ago something about delegating, I agree with you that this is not something that should just be delegated to the clinical program. But maybe Gautam's just sort of like wearing away some of my, I don't know, my feelings about all of this. But maybe, a lot of other schools have like a DEI committee or, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging committee. Maybe we need to set up that kind of a committee and, have them, delegate to them, really trying to figure all this stuff out. And then, maybe Gautam would serve on it and maybe Renee would serve on it. And then once we get their guidance, we can, take it back up as a faculty.
Liz, if I can just come in, what do you see the role of the DEI committee as distinct from the role of this faculty? How would that be different from what we're doing now?
Well, we could, first of all, it'd be a smaller group, and so they might be able to get more work done. It might be a little bit easier to talk, maybe even in one room rather than on Zoom. And, we could have administrators join, we could have maybe an adjunct, I don't know, maybe some support staff, some students, so that we can have everyone well represented and get, really hammer out a really good policy without having to take up so much time in these faculty meetings that can go on for hours and hours, and then we don't decide anything.
Renee, what do you think about that idea?
Well, I think it's, I don't know how far that's going to get us. I'm not opposed to the idea. I think it's a good place for us to start in setting up that committee. But I also want to raise the fact that we have had an ad hoc DEI committee in the past, right? And we've put out statements and we've tried to think about initiatives. We've tried to do certain cultural programming throughout the year. But what doesn't seem to happen in that space is that everyone's not privy to what those conversations are. I think we could maybe do a better job of like bringing that back to the overall faculty. But then beyond that, we don't necessarily have that. I would wonder if that committee has both the charge to think about the law school broadly and holistically, as opposed to just kind of thinking about what additional things that we can do related to DEI initiatives.
So this is a great conversation. I'm looking at the clock, and unfortunately, we do need to get kind of concrete in terms of the mandate, which really says we need to do. Let's just focus on 303C, the providing education, 2 opportunities, bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism. And I hear this energy from Liz and Gautam to have the clinics and other specialty seminars take up one of those spots. And I'm just wondering what the thoughts of the group are on the initial at the start of the program of legal education. We can't have our students starting in the clinic or starting in seminars. So where would you say, I guess I'm asking you, Liz, but I'd be interested in hearing from Gautam and Renee as well. Where do we start with this kind of training or educational opportunity?
Well, it seems to me, we do an orientation for all the 1Ls and the transfers and all those people. So maybe, we can build in a standalone session, if you will, on DEI related concerns. So students will at least be familiar with the language and the terminology, and they'll know that they should be thinking about race and being anti-racist and things like that when they're starting out law school, at the same time that they're learning about how courts are organized and what precedent means and things like that. So, I think that's a good way to do it. I have heard also of a couple of schools where like all the teachers who teach contracts, they get together and they try to talk about how do they incorporate questions about race into what they're doing. So it doesn't have to be a top-down kind of thing. Maybe that's like something easy that the contracts or property or Civ Pro professors can do, or I don't know. They're all steps in the right direction, right?
I think that the orientation suggestion is a good one. I won't be doing it obviously because I always spend my summers on the Cape writing my 3 articles that I really deeply care about. So I think someone like Renee is so articulate that she would be so great in that setting or someone along those lines. But I also think maybe I think that we have a lot of different approaches to teaching in the 1L curriculum at the school, and that seems fine to me. I don't know if we would get all the people to agree in the class. I know, legal writing might be another space for it. Obviously we don't invite them to faculty meetings because we don't, what are they even doing? But, that might be the place for it as well.
Actually, that's raises a good point. Do we have any of our legal writing colleagues here on this Zoom call? Because I would appreciate hearing from them. We don't generally invite them to these faculty meetings, but I did issue an invitation for this one.
Yeah, my understanding is that they typically don't get to attend these meetings. So unfortunately, we don't have the value of their voices in this conversation.
So is that something we should think about, including legal writing faculty in this conversation?
I'm open to that. That's a friendly amendment. Put them on this committee.
I do want to voice my concern, I think, about, this prospective plan that we're trying to etch out now. And, again, even thinking back to my own experience in law school, I think it might be a very confusing experience for students to come into the orientation and to have maybe a segment that lasts a half an hour, an hour about issues of race or bias or cultural competency in lawyering. And then proceed to take their 1L courses if these same issues aren't actually talked about or discussed or addressed in any kind of concerted way when they're discussing property, when they're talking about criminal law or criminal procedure. And then again, somehow, you know, in their second, third year of law school in a clinic to have their next opportunity to discuss some of these issues that are very much alive and embedded in the law. And so I think that actually, I have found that students have talked to me about how confusing that is and how it seems as if there isn't space to talk about, you know, issues of race, issues of difference in the classroom beyond things like clinic or specific seminars that we offer here. And again, I worry and just want to voice my concern that to put this on the shoulders of clinical faculty, which, you know, make up the biggest representation of least of faculty of color that we have at the school at this time.
So would a solution to that issue be hiring more faculty of color and then having that be, you know, we're in hiring season now. Could we just make adding to the new faculty's teaching load that they have to teach a course that would meet this requirement?
Well, I just want to make sure that we hire people of the right quality, you know, if we're going to be increasing the faculty. I don't know about, I supported all the people on this call. You know, I remember, you know, Renee, you've just grown so much since we took you in into our family here. But, you know, and Liz has just been, you know, just such a great member of our community and, you know, yeah. So, you know, but, you know, some of these people just aren't up to snuff and, you know, we got to make sure that they are because, you know, this school is really important.
Liz? Liz, you're
Gautam, there's a lot that you're saying that I think I'd like to encourage you to rethink some of your thoughts around this. We've had, you know, plenty of diverse candidates come through, and, you know, oftentimes the candidates just choose to go to a higher ranked institution. You know, maybe we can make more of an effort in that regard. The other thing is, you know, we are at least somewhat capable of change, right? I used to teach a course that was called Women in the Law, and now it's called Gender in the Law. And I know that I've had to expand my viewpoints around issues of gender and sex. And so, you know, and I've dabbled in the clinic here and there. And I think that, you know, I want to encourage you to be a little bit more open-minded than you've indicated so far. I know you're capable of it. I have no doubt.
Well, do we think, I mean, this does get to this kind of foundational question about whether this is, does the ABA mandate give us, as Renee describes, an opportunity to really change the way we provide legal education by embedding these values and these training opportunities throughout the course? Or is this an opportunity for us to support our clinicians and our faculty of color and other faculty who might be interested in these issues to do deeper work in that area?
I'd love to know what some of our other colleagues think about this, tell you the truth.
Well, I'll just say, I think I've made my position clear on this. And I do think it's a mistake to categorize this work or the development of our compliance by only putting it on the shoulders of faculty of color and clinicians. I think that really what this speaks to is the larger changes that we need to think about as teachers, as folks who are actually building the next generation of lawyers, and hopefully see that as something that needs to cut across all of our classes and what we do here at the law school.
Renee, just
I really appreciate all the words that have been said today. They've been very, very good words. I've been thinking a lot. You know, I'm sure, you know, we can make this happen in a way that people support, or, you know, that we have a good, good avenue for it. And, I think the dean and I will certainly be talking about this when we have dinner, next weekend at the club. So, we'll be sure, I think, to continue this conversation.
Liz, any last words?
Well, I see that Holly's been wanting to say
Oh.
something. Maybe Holly can talk and then I'll talk after her.
Okay, go for it. Holly, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Sure, no problem. Well, two things. Absolutely, I agree with Renee that this should not be on the shoulders of the professors of color. It's everyone's issue, and if anything, the burden should be shifted. And the solution of hiring more people of color in academia is great, but it's not the answer, certainly. And I do have some concerns, though, because there are people who will be uncomfortable with the topic and not really do it justice, perhaps make it worse in the classroom. I, at one point in my career, ran a pro bono program, and the issue we always ran into is if you force people to do pro bono, are they going to do a good job of it? And so if we are forcing this on the professors, which of course we can't do, we have to come to some agreement what we're going to do. Will it create a dynamic in the classroom that is actually hurtful? And I don't know the solution to that.
Liz?
I just think that by constituting this kind of committee with representatives from across the law school, we'll get a really good sense of both what we could be doing, push ourselves maybe a little bit to go beyond what we've done so far, but also not have unreasonable expectations of people who have been, for example, like Gautam, who've been teaching here forever and maybe a little reluctant to change. So I think it sounds like a good, really smart middle of the road kind of approach that I would wholly endorse.
Okay, well, we have to move on to the other items on our agenda. As you know, Gautam will be retiring next year, and so we have to plan our retirement CLE and party that we'll be having at his tennis club. So we'll be spending the rest of the faculty meeting discussing that. Thank you all for your participation.
Yes.
Woo, now everybody, we're at a roll. Let's talk. Gautam, you need to go take a shower.
A soapwood shower, my God. Ugh.
I'm headed there as well. I have to say that was really pretty uncomfortable.
I loved it. That would be a perfect, smart, middle of the road solution that I would be in favor of. So what do you all think? I heard a couple of comments in the chat that this felt cathartic, that it felt familiar. What did we miss? What are some other things that could be surfaced, and kind of where do we go from here? We have another half hour or so to continue the conversation.
Well, this is Doug Cortez. I can't find the hand to raise on my cell phone. I'm in Little Rock and we are covered in ice, so which is unusual for this part of the country. In any event, I'm a novice as far as teaching clinic goes. I recently came out of private practice. Well, came out of private practice, went to work for legal aid for a few years, and then ended up at the law school. And and I've always been interested in how the ABA makes its decisions about how law schools should be run or sometimes must be run. And I, more recently, I did an LLM at a law school. So I had some experience being a student at one law school and then going to a completely different environment in another law school. I went to SMU for law school, and then I went to Vermont Law School for my LLM. So those of you that know business schools like SMU relative to Vermont, which is different universities. And I learned a lot there. But my my deal is, you know, and I always talk about whether it's new students or new attorneys that, you know, I'm taking on brand new out of law school students and talk to them. And by the way, I identify as Hispanic. So, but I always talk to, you know, my students and baby lawyers and all that, like, you know, you gotta meet clients and other people kind of where you find them and, you know, be on their level. Obviously don't talk down to people. But you know, you got to meet them where they are. And you have to show people mutual respect. And a lot of people have that natural ability and a lot of people don't. And in a clinic setting, I also teach a doctrinal course, but in a clinic setting, I find it a lot more of an engaging conversation with the students than I do in a doctrinal type course. Whereas, you know, it's kind of like, you know, pulling teeth a lot of times in the doctrinal courses just to get participation in the class. Whereas in the clinic I run my meetings like we're in a law firm, we're sitting at a table, like we're talking about cases just like we're going to be at a law firm. So when you leave here, it won't be foreign to you when you get there. But it makes it a lot, those discussions talking about everything from, you know, race to age to, you know, I'm also a disabled veteran and also have mental health issues, you know, so I just from my own experience, I'm able to talk to them about a lot of these things. That doesn't mean one has to have those experiences, obviously, to be able to talk. We're scholars and professors and professionals, and you know, one of the things I tell them, I'm sorry for going on too long, but one of the things I tell them is that at this point in your life, you never have to take another class per se. You should know how to teach yourself anything in the universe, basically. And also, you know, obviously getting some help from other people in the field that know more, but and also, you know, have a hand up on being able to teach other people things. So I think that it's a good place to do it because of the format of the classes, or maybe, you know, small seminar kind of courses, like the one I took, for example, in advanced bankruptcy when I was doing my JD. You know, it was about 7 or 8, 9 students in the small seminar. But definitely doing it in a 100+ person lecture hall is just, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, it's useless, you know, and maybe worse than useless. It may do more harm than good, because students will be so turned off to it, you know, and we have different students, you know, we have broad range of students everywhere from people who are very much into critical race theory and those who are very much opposed to even raising it as a discussion. But you know, they all need to at least hear it. So anyway,
Thanks,
that's my
Doug.
2 points, and I'll leave you alone.
Thank you. Liz?
I was really struck by how much Gautam and I were essentially isolating Renee. That we were sort of setting her up to be the person of color asking for things to be done around race, and me with my middle of the road mamby-pamby kind of approach, and Gautam with his, well, we all know what approach that was. I just like my heart was hurting. It was hard to play the role for a couple of reasons, but certainly that was one of them. And so I do think that as clinicians who care about race justice and anti-racism, part of what we need to be doing is, you know, checking in our own houses. How are our colleagues doing? How are people faring? We've set up actually an anti-racism committee in our clinical program as a way to try to get at some of the issues that have arisen in all different sorts of power dynamics: faculty support staff, student support staff, student faculty, student. We haven't found, I can't, you know, any kind of magic bullet in any of this, but what I can say is that it's forced us to deal with realities in a way that we have just ducked before. And that's something that I do recommend. The other thing that I've been intrigued by is that when we were sort of talking about critical race theory and bringing in a race perspective to 1L courses and things like this, we got a huge amount of pushback. The more we started to talk about context and history and the basis for why certain decisions came down the ways that they did, the more there was sort of some curiosity from some of the colleagues who might have been initially more speaking from Gautam's perspective. So that, just even having a couple of people, even if it's 3 of the Civ Pro professors or 3 of the property professors, depending upon how big your law school is, it could be a start just to create more carrots and more community around making change.
Thanks, Liz. I think Gautam and then Renee.
Oh, I think I should let Renee go first for once.
Okay, Renee.
Well, so, I appreciate, the points that have been raised. I think there were a few things that I don't necessarily know that we got to. I mean, one of the things that I do want to echo is what Liz said about, I think in the last few years, particularly as ad hoc DEI committees or formal DEI committees have been staffed up or expanded, I do think a lot of times that it's more often than not faculty of color that are assigned to those committees. And I do think that there's a certain amount of burnout or kind of sometimes personal, like both experience that you have as a person of color when you're either reacting to or trying to work through systems to deal with issues of race and racism in the law and in our law school environment. So I want to raise that because I do feel like, there was a lot of energy and a lot of, urgency, I think, in 2020 to at least start having these conversations. And I think that folks who engage that in good faith, some of which I think have been burned out to a certain extent, and also are trying to figure out what exactly have we accomplished or what has changed in this moment? Or is it just that we've had some conversations and we've taken some initial steps or tried to address some maybe low-hanging fruit or expanded some programming at the law school. So I wanted to raise that. And then also, we were trying to provide these perspectives, but I think that Holly raised a really good point around why are we giving the students a training in orientation when we haven't necessarily been trained on how to have these conversations or the language. And, again, that's not all of us. I think a lot of us are already engaged in work around issues of difference and racial justice and other forms of oppression or systems of oppression. But by and large, at least, I don't necessarily know that faculties in law schools have widespread kind of done training in a way that is really giving faculty opportunities to integrate that into the classroom, specifically the doctrinal classroom. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Renee. Gautam.
Yeah, so first of all, I appreciate everyone's kind words. It's always fun to play the heel, I guess. And I want to echo what Liz said about our 2 roles sort of boxing Renee out, or like, being, I think, one of the things that I was trying to do intentionally was like, we were kind of going in circles, right? We were not really getting very far. And I think that's partially because this is, I think, reflective of a lot of debates that faculty sometimes have. Like, it's like just maybe a newer version of an old story, which is that, some people feel either nervous, unqualified, or just like overextended or resistant, right? And they don't really want to change. And it can be hard. I think, we had a faculty retreat a few weeks ago, and I promised that none of my faculty were like acting as in such caricatured ways of the way that I was trying to dial into. But I do think that there's real hesitancy about the ability to do this. And I think people are resistant to like any kind of top-down mandate. So some of the schools I've taught at, like we've had people come in, not even from the faculty, but from the Center for Teaching or for another law school to talk about how they do things to kind of be instructive and help guide a bit. And I think that some people are open to that, but usually the room is made up of those people. The last thing I'll say is that one of the things that we talked about in the retreat that I hadn't really clued into, but I think is going to be a challenge for many people, including me, is that in 303C, it says a law school shall provide education to law students on bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism. And we were having a discussion about that's a lot of things, right? It's not and or, right? It's an and. It's you have to do all of them. And I think if I had to look at even, I think many of us would be hard pressed to say that we're doing that all of the above in a class, even in a class that's really explicitly devoted to that. So I think that's going to be a challenge as well.
So I think what's interesting and what I'd like to hear from folks in the room, if you have any thoughts, is this apparent tension between isolating the faculty of color and the clinicians, and to the extent that there's overlap there, so much more so, as the ones responsible for providing these opportunities, and the tension against what Holly and Renee and in fact, I think Liz also raised, with the potential harm that is done by having people who aren't trained, who aren't qualified, who aren't self-reflective about these issues, providing the training and the resources and the education. And how do we spread the responsibility across the faculty, even among willing faculty, if those faculty, like, the role Liz was playing, good-hearted liberal, she can grow. She used to teach women in the law, and now she teaches gender in the law. Look at her. Yeah, I can do this stuff. Or you can imagine, I'm just cringing thinking about being a queer or trans student in one of her classes where she is bumbling through and causing more harm. So how do we confront that tension in a way that doesn't perpetuate, isolating the people of color and the clinicians?
Just as an added on that, Carolyn, is isolating the faculty of color and the clinicians, but we need to also be aware that the clinicians may not be quite voicing the same things that Gautam was.
Absolutely.
But there's no guarantee that we have all of our anti-racism ducks in a row just because we teach in the clinic.
Absolutely.
And in fact, I think that the sort of liberal, if you will, approach is likely to find a home in a lot of our programs.
Yes.
And I think that that's very, very, very risky.
Yeah. Yeah. How have other schools, what are other schools doing, to the extent people want to share? What are conversations you all are having? I have never seen a group of clinicians so quiet. We were warned. We had small group activities planned, and we were warned. You all wouldn't show up if you knew there were going to be small group activities. Yes. In the chat, Ann Gordon's CLR piece speaks to this issue. Absolutely. And there have been a couple of really good articles about in CLR and I think in one of the St. Louis journals about how to provide anti-racism education when you yourself are not an anti-racist educator. Yeah. Daria.
Hi, I'm sorry, my camera's broken, or I would put it on to talk. So I'm at Iowa, and we recently approved a pilot class that's going to be a 1-credit, half a semester class, the second semester of 1L year that will be required. That will be called Perspectives on the Law. It's completely, in my opinion, it was just like a deal with the devil, but It will be called Perspectives on the Law, and it will present a range of theories and thoughts about history of the law, like 1 week on law and economics, and 1 week on implicit bias, and 1 week on critical race theory, and 1 week on something else. And I think there was a feeling that, like, if we could get approval for a 1 credit class, then there would be like room to slowly turn it into what some of us envision an anti-racism class might be. But for right now, it feels like one of those things, in my opinion, that's like more harmful. I mean, I think any student who's expecting a class or expecting a law school to offer something about anti-racism, and it's couched in perspectives of the law and sandwiched in amongst a lot of other contrary stuff, it's pretty problematic. But I'd be super interested to hear what people think about that and what other people are doing.
So that's in response to the mandate. That's one of the ways that the mandate is going to be met at Iowa.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Wow. Yeah. So find people on both sides there. Suzanne.
Hi, I'm from Roger Williams, and I just wanted to mention that we have a 3 credit required race in the Foundations of Law class for second years that was already in the works before 303. But in terms of sort of how to create a community, we have an informal teaching group that includes, it's really inclusive, anyone who identifies as feeling like they're a teacher in the building. So it can be staff, it can be adjuncts, doctrinal. It meets every Friday. We've been doing it now for almost 3 years. And we talk about diversity issues and how we integrate those into the way we're working and teaching with students. And I have found it to just be, and we've talked about it. We did a session at AALS. I've just found it's been an incredible way to share resources, provide, in some cases, almost training and mentorship on how to do this in a way that's not more dangerous or harmful. And we've just had a lot of success building a community. It's not a formal committee. It is this ad hoc group. We rotate facilitation. It's not perfect, but I do think we've had some, significant progress truly integrating these issues into doctrinal classes and having clinicians, faculty, and staff of color add what they feel makes sense to add to the conversation without a lot of pressure. And it's been fairly organic, and I think really helpful with burnout, but also helpful in terms of being creative and bouncing ideas off and feeling like there's no stupid idea. And should I try this? I did try it. It failed. But really creating that community within your institution can be helpful.
Thanks, Suzanne. Lori?
Hi, thanks. I'm Lori from Seton Hall, director of our clinical program there. And I was waiting then, okay, can we finish this conversation? Because I feel like, okay, that's where we've gotten with our faculty, and now give us the answer. So you guys did a great job, and it was cathartic, and to hear that. And I'm like, yes, and who's not in the room or who's told to leave because it's executive session and we're going to vote now. So, you contract faculty, get out of the room, that sort of thing. So I thought it was really interesting that you flagged that as a point up front. We have done the orientation approach. So we were doing that before 2020 as well, but we have all the students read Color of Law, have a discussion of Richard Rothstein, and try to have them use that as a framing and perspective when they get into their classes. And then our lawyering class. So we went with that legal writing. The lawyering class has incorporated all those 3 points, professional, like you said, it's the whole list into the curriculum. And then after that, we've struggled with how to do it. We talked about, should we have a class? And I said, when we talk about it, for a while, it was a discussion in the DEI committee that got disbanded. So that all sounded familiar. What's going on with that committee? Where's it going? So we stuck it with the curriculum committee, which I think is good to pull in people who would necessarily have this discussion. So we've had a lot of doctrinal faculty who don't usually deal with these issues, kind of flailing, like, all right, yeah, it's an issue. Let's make a list. Which classes? We had a kind of humorous list of which classes address some of these issues. And it was like 2/3 of the classes at the law school. Yeah, some class we talk about it. So that wasn't a terribly helpful exercise. But we struggled with how to make sure it's approached across the curriculum. We did decide in our criminal law class to go from 3 to 4 credits so that across the board, they could discuss more criminal justice issues or criminal legal reform issues and race issues. So all our criminal faculty agreed to that. And then in terms of that second requirement, it is like, well, clinics and externships are doing it. So we'll just, you guys just figured out you're covering that second one. So we have kind of have a mixed approach, but definitely how to keep it moving forward is something we've struggled with. And I know Liz's approach of like that middle ground, like, well, there's this mixed committee pulling people in, that kind of mixed solution. But I do wonder, is that something, who can keep this conversation moving forward? That's what we've struggled with, and really try to make sure it's integrated across the curriculum. So that's something we're still struggling with. Definitely individual faculty are looking into do it, and in criminal laws, I think where we've made the most specific progress, but still struggling with how to keep the conversation moving forward.
Thank you, Lori. That's a great set of reflections. Liz. You're muted.
Lori, just to echo what you're talking about, I think that somewhere is the cross between burnout factor and exhaustion, and without a maybe also frustration. Like, you need to get people often feel that they need to see something positive happen in order to keep the movement going forward. That's both. I mean, what you made me think about is the importance of having strong leadership in your deans and associate deans, and making sure, for example, to the extent that any of us have any room for this, if you are doing a dean search, if you are involved in trying to get people to be associate deans or other people of power, to make sure that they're going to be people who are going to support people doing this kind of work, and that they come up with innovative ways to make sure that the people doing the anti-racism work are not being just flat out burnt out by the effort of rolling the heavy boulder up the hill. I can't stress enough how important that leadership can be.
Yep.
Yeah.
One thing that that we did in our clinical program, I co-chair our clinic's anti-racism committee, is that we started a 1 credit add-on to clinic that's optional, but only for clinic students, because part of its case rounds to discuss critical theories. And we had the first meeting of it last week. And I think what was really interesting to me, maybe this is because I'm new to Cornell, this is my first year teaching here. And I was at Vanderbilt beforehand, which had a very different approach, as law schools really vary on these things, is that the students really wanted space to like talk through these problems broadly defined. And it made me realize that I was like, I don't know how much I have a great read on the student beat, or like on where they are on these issues. And I think it's an important constituency, obviously, despite what my character maybe thinks on this topic. And we have an associate dean for DEI who's a faculty member, and I think that she is really attuned to that probably more than I am, probably also partly because she's a lawyer for 1L. So all that to say that, like, I think it would be, effective for schools to think about, including students as much as possible, and the kind of discussions about how to implement this, because they seem to, I think, have a real need, but also I think a perspective that I don't know that I'm always being talked about.
Thanks, Gautam. Renee, I think you might get the last word appropriately.
I'll try to be brief. The other thing I wanted to mention, just both naming for myself, I do think it is helpful for us internal to our institutions and across institutions to have conversations about how we implement 303C in our classrooms and in our seminars, because I do think, and I'm speaking for myself, I think I sometimes make assumptions based off of, readings, discussions that we're gonna have. I teach a kind of community development clinic that's based in Chicago, so we talk a lot about place. Part of that conversation is always race, but in having conversations about 303C, I really actually had to map on to my syllabus in terms of course segments and the readings. How am I intentionally doing this? I think sometimes we just assume that, this is a part of the package, either maybe because we're doing discrimination litigation, or because of the subject matter, or because of the client base. And I think it is this moment and the conversations that I think the ABA rules are going to require. I think it is a good opportunity for us as clinicians to be really intentional in doing that type of reflection and also not making assumptions that we're already doing this based off of the work that we do, whether it's, you know, pro bono and working with low-income clients or clients of color. That does not necessarily address any issues of bias, racism, or cultural competency if we're not intentional about each part of that.
That's such a great point. So the idea of actually naming our learning objectives as these things, however we want to describe them, instead of just assuming that because we teach clinic or because we teach a gender in the law seminar, we are providing students opportunities to be assessed and achieve these outcomes. That's such a great point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, naming them and mapping them onto.
Absolutely. And assessing our own progress toward achieving them. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, this has been great. Obviously to be continued. You know, our next faculty meeting is next week at the same time. So, and we will invite the legal writing folks. And I think it's Gautam's turn to bring breakfast. So we'll look forward to that. He'll get it catered from his club.
Thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you all on March 8th and April 13th. But in the meantime, huge thanks to our presenters today for affirming and presenting catharsis and also really surfacing and exploring these questions that we all have together. Thanks so much, and best wishes to all of you for a great week. Take care.
Thank you all.